thanks a lot for the invitation. Thanks all for coming over lunch. And I hope I can give you a little overview of what I've been doing. And first of all, I would like to show you, I guess you're not familiar where Constance is, so I brought a little map of Europe, and you see that's Germany. And we are actually all the way in the south. Constance is like on the Swiss border, right on the Swiss border. The closest airport is Zurich, which is like 45 minutes away, and that's where I'm from. And the special thing about our department is that we have a special focus on exploration and visualization of large data sets. That's our poster in German for our program. And it's about exploration and visualization of large data sets, and that is kind of the focus not only of my group, but also of the whole department. And to give you a little impression of where I come from, I did most of my early work in my research career in the database area. So I actually did my dissertation and habilitation both mostly on databases, publishing in Sigmod, VLDB, KDD, like the database folks among you may know these conferences. And this is where I got my credentials, but I had always the hobby on working on visualization. At that time, it was really a hobby because I was doing it on the side. My boss didn't like it that much. But it was good advice that I did my career in databases because there was no career in visualization back then. There was no positions, there was nothing I could have done. And so my work was basically, and this is actually my research group in Constance, my PhD students and postdocs here. And the credit for much of what I show you today goes to them because they did all the implementations, or most of it at least. And also, of course, some of the ideas are coming from their research projects. And now back to my focus area. It started all from database and information systems. And among these kind of topics that I was covering in that area, I was first doing work on core database technology. And I don't know what's happening now here. It doesn't show what it's supposed to show. So it worked before, but it doesn't work now. So I can't show you the nice slide with an overview. It shows up here, so I kind of surprised that it, I don't think it's simply not showing it. Strange enough. I'd probably restart the PowerPoint.
It might work better in mirroring mode at some time.
On mirroring mode.
It will show exactly the same if you do that sometime.
I probably just start the presentation again because like it's a big file and PowerPoint seems to be screwed up. So give me a second to restart it. Sorry for that, but some of the programs are not that kind of. Just need to restart the file. It's a 100 megabyte PowerPoint, so it's not too bad, but. Okay, it does work. So, thanks a lot for your patience. So I did, in my early days, I did work on high-dimensional indexing, interactive queries, nearest neighbor queries, which is all basically core database research. So not that much related to the SCIIInstitute, even though in my first conversations today, I found out that it is related in some sense, because you need that for several of the tasks that you are doing, especially if you're going to very large data sets and you always have high-dimensional feature vectors, you are doing nearest neighbor search on them. So you need some of these technologies. And actually, some of the most highly cited papers of mine are still from that early days. And like this is something, and I have a couple of slides on some of this. And out of this core database research, I had like 3 areas of research that I worked and still work in is data analysis, which is like data mining type research. Then information visualization, that I'm probably most known in this community. And then multimedia databases, where I also did some work on some of the different tasks. And in between there are kind of things like visual analytics that was already mentioned, similarity search, interactive exploration, and there are lots of techniques that I'm not going to explain and even more applications around it And this is just giving you a little picture of the different application areas that I have been working on. And it's really driven by real data sets. I like to work on real problems, get a real data set and solve that problem. And in some cases, as you'll see in some of the examples I bring, it's engineering type work. You're solving a problem, taking everything it needs to solve the problem, which I think is perfectly fine. But on other sides, we have problems where we do more basic research, where we have to prove, where we have to kind of go into more theoretical work to actually do a good foundation for what we do. And we try to do both, to do kind of the good solutions for some of these problems. And the philosophy behind my group is basically take real-world problems and solve them. And as long as we have enough of the real-world problems to solve, it's a good thing. And if we can do our contribution to some of this, I feel this very rewarding, and I like that. And I think some of you here do similar, have a similar approach to doing research. The main difference maybe is that I usually work on abstract data. Many of you work on more concrete data, 2D, 3D data. But of course, there is lots of overlap in between. And just the promised 2 slides about the index structure type work I did, the X tree. Back then, we looked into the reasons why some of the nearest neighbor queries didn't work well in high-dimensional spaces. And we found out that the R tree index structure generates a high degree of overlap. If you know the R tree, which is a rectangular tree type of thing, basic index structure, and my boss at that time, my PhD advisor, Hans-Peter Kriegel, he was one of the inventor of the R star tree, which is like the commercial variant of the R tree. And we found out there's lots of overlap in the directory, and you see that here. And the idea was, why don't we try to avoid the overlap in the cases where we can avoid it? And the idea was basically then generating types of supernodes in between, and this dynamically depending on the dimensionality and the properties of the data. And the supernodes that you see here are just generated if it on average, and there is a formula for calculating that, if on average you have to access both sides anyway. If there is too high, if there would be too high degree of overlap in the directory, then you don't split them. Why should you split them if you have to access them both anyway, right? So it's faster to have them consecutive on storage instead of kind of having 2-page accesses. So this turned out to be better, and there's another theoretical part of it. You can theoretically define an overlap-free split, and in cases that is possible, you use, of course, the overlap-free split. And both is like mathematically founded and works well. And basically what you get is, in the low-dimensional case, you get the R tree or R star tree type index structure. In the high-dimensional space, you get almost linear structure, which is known to be the best in high-dimensional spaces, and this dynamically on the data. And this was basically the contribution. And you can show these nice speed-up numbers, and this is factors of speed-up, not percentages. Like this is like for point queries, it's like 200 to 400 times faster depending on the dimensionality, which was incredibly. But even for like point queries are not that important in high-dimensional space, but for nearest neighbor queries, you still get a speed up of factor of 20, which is like 2,000% faster for like 12 to 16-dimensional spaces. And if you go higher, you have a linear structure anyway. And this is kind of the contribution that we did here. And this was just for introduction. The rest will be more visual of my talk. So I just wanted to give you a little impression of my background that you see that it's kind of where I'm coming from. Okay, this is now the overview slide of my research group. Research areas are information visualization, visual analytics. Back then we called it visual data mining. Like this is a phrase that I termed and gave tutorials at DLDB, SIGMOD, and other conferences. We do some geospatial data mining, which is geodomain, like geographical domain, similarity search in multimedia databases. And you see some pictures up here, like research prototype for similarity search of like 3D objects, high-dimensional clustering, and applications are very wide, ranging from e-humanities, digital humanities, to network security, document analysis, financial data analysis, movement analysis in the geospatial domain, molecular biology, feature engineering, and a number of additional applications. And we have industrial collaborations with a number of companies in the US, but also in Germany. And this is just one slide overview. So now I start my real talk. Solving problems with visual analytics, the role of visualization analytics in exploring multidimensional data. And like if you look at the National Academy of Engineering in the US, you find a slide like this on their webpage. And I like this slide. They are naming all the big problems. These are the big challenge problems, and I'm sure, and I know that some of you are working on some of them. I like especially this one, engineer the tools of scientific discovery. I feel myself home there. The tools of scientific discovery, that is actually what I like to do. And of course, these tools of scientific discovery are then used to solving some of these problems. And as you know, these grand challenge problems relate to the grand problems of the world. And some of you are working on these. I don't need to name them: energy, climate, health, security, education, financial. It's all the big problems. And what is clear to all of you is that these grand challenges require dealing with massive and complex data. And actually, I got a nice slide from Chris when we met at a workshop in December. This is what the data is about, and it's like 2011, so it's not the news, but it's like still very nice. And this is every minute of the day, how much data you get. And there are nice numbers out there. You see like it's in the millions per minute. So you can do the math, how much it is per day. And the largest numbers are actually the IP packets, and they would be much higher than you see here. And the one thing that I want to talk about this slide, I don't want to go into any of the numbers, wouldn't kill us here and take the rest of today. But the point is that some of this data is really difficult to explore. If you have like millions of little items, little records that you get that have like a few fields or a few hundred fields that you get, for example, for IP packets, you have the port number, source destination, IP addresses, and stuff like that. You have high-dimensional vectors for every of these little items, and you have millions of those per minute. So what do you do with a day, a year worth of data? This is an incredibly complex problem, high-dimensional data, and this is the type of problems that we work on. It can be feature vectors, it can be data coming from any of these domains, the news data, the kind of Twitter data, and this is the type of things that we work on. So what is the role? I had the subtitle of my talk, the role of visualization in analytics. So what is the role of visualization? And I have some bad news. Visualization of massive data does not work. Maybe not the right slide to put up here. But what I mean is, and just let me show you the IP example. If I just show the data, that's what you get. This is like a tree map type display, and you show on a very low level the IP data. And if you have good eyes, you see there is some red spot somewhere. You probably don't see it. And this isn't scaling to the level that we need it, right? This is not billions of data. There is no way to show it all. Simply no way to show it all. And I'm only showing one dimension of it. I'm not showing all the hundreds of dimensions that I have. So there is no simple way of dealing with billions of records in just visualizing it. And you will also turn out on me, like if I allow you to ask questions, you will say, oh, we can do better. I know. And we'll get to that in a minute. But, and by the way, you are allowed to ask questions and jump on me anytime you want. So I'm fine with that. So you can, of course, do things like showing this on a big wall, and we have a power wall in Constance, and you have stuff like that here, and you have large displays. But even here, I show now the 100 most important, the 100 ports with the most traffic. And as you can see, you can detect something on a big wall. But this is only a very small portion of the data anyway. So it's not scaling to the full extent. And just to give you a little more impression of this picture, you see like there are certain things where something is happening. You can detect some sort of information out of this. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying you can't visualize it all. There is no way. So I have some good news. We have something on the analytics side, and the analysis of massive data is working. You can analyze massive data. We have the computational power. Sounds like very good news. And it is. What I left out was under certain preconditions. There are some preconditions that automated analysis works. And I have been working in the data mining area, have developed some clustering algorithms in high dimensions, and it does work, but you have to fulfill certain preconditions. And what are these preconditions? And the bad news, of course, is that these preconditions are rarely met. What are the preconditions? Data needs to be clearly structured. Semantics needs to be well defined. Data is complete, correct, not changing over time. And we can add onto that list. If the data is so nice, then it does work. But of course, it doesn't in most cases. If you look at the data examples that I brought, almost none of them, these preconditions are met. And there's one additional precondition. The problem needs to be well defined. In some cases, we have no clear problem definitions. Think about molecular biology. And I have a project in there, and they don't know what they are looking for. They know there's something in there. They know the reason for some illness is in the data, but they have no clue how to define it. And the algorithms, they can only work if we have a definition. So defining the problem is not clear, and the data is, of course, in many ways, in molecular biology at least, not clearly defined. But take Twitter, take any of the big data sources. The data is not that clearly structured. The semantics is not well defined. We have the semantic gap in all what is dealing with digital humanities. And of course, it's never complete. If you deal with real data, it's never correct. And of course, it's changing over time. Like take the virus and network data detection problem. The old viruses are not a problem. Finding the new one is a problem, and this is not clear. There's a question.
Data cannot change over time because you have not only massive data, you have dynamic indexing structure that can incorporate objects. Right?
Yeah.
And we also have time series analytics.
Absolutely.
On large scale as well.
Yeah. So I think like if the problem is changing over time, like the virus example, we don't know. Like we can model the data and we can store the data and make it accessible fast enough. But detecting a new virus is something where the semantics of the data changes over time, what you want to detect there. And there is no algorithm that I know that is detecting new viruses automatically. We collaborate with Symantec in a project, and they are humans that actually sit there and have, of course, plenty of automated technology sitting at their disposal, but they have to decide whether it's a new computer game that is causing this strange pattern, or a new program that is causing some kind of interesting patterns, or whether it's really a virus and they have to take action. And this, I don't see any way that this is changing anytime soon. Same is true for fraud detection. Like I worked at AT&T in my career, and the main thing is, if you shut down the fraudsters in one corner of your system, you know they come in another door the next day, or try at least. That's for sure. But of course, you don't know that door. If you know it, it's not a problem. You would close it. And like this is kind of this thing what I meant by changing over time. Of course, you can do like the data storage and analysis part and aggregation part maybe, but you can't do the detection part in dynamic data that easily. So, and I'm not saying that there is no work in all these areas. Of course, people are working at closing the semantic gap. That's one of the main tasks that we do, right? So this is all our research agenda here. And I have a few examples, but I already mentioned them, like network security, detection of novel viruses. Typical case where this doesn't work, credit fraud, or phone fraud, or whatever. You have the same problem. It won't work automatically. You can have a lot of help by automated algorithms, but it will never work perfectly. Business analytics, competitive business analytics, we have some projects there. It's like impossible to do that fully automatically because there's humans on the other side, and that's part of the story. There's intelligence on the other side. This is not just machines. And like molecular biology, just to take 4 examples from 4 domains where I have some experience. So we are back with visualization. Analysis is great, but doesn't solve the full problem. And I think visualization is especially important for the interactive exploration of complex data. interactive problem specification, if you don't have the problem specified. I would call it hypothesis generation process. You generate hypotheses by visualizing the data. Interactive steering of the automated algorithms. You need to tell them where to go, like in molecular biology, no way without that. And of course, you communicate the results of your algorithms. And these are the areas. And this is basically the motivation for visual analytics, combining the strengths of humans and computers, like storage, computational power with like domain knowledge, general knowledge, which is going towards semantics, perception, and creativity. And actually this slide I found in a book like about 15 to 20 years ago. And the only thing that I changed over time was putting arrows here. It's really far up, right? It's like change. But I didn't really had any reasons to change that part still. Computers are still not really good in the general sense of general knowledge. I don't know even how to define creativity of a computer, and that would be an interesting discussion, whether we can define it, how a creative computer would be. Okay, and summarizing visual analytics, I like the quote that I put up here. It's attributed to Albert Einstein, but he never said it probably. It's kind of, I don't think computers were that fast when he lived, but so it's still nice. Computers are incredibly fast, accurate, and stupid. Humans are incredibly slow, inaccurate, and brilliant. Together, they are powerful beyond imagination. And I think that is the motivation for visual analytics. Bring the strengths together and solve the problems in the right way. And if you're interested in more what we have put together in Europe, I was heading a European initiative on visual analytics. It was actually called Solving Problems with Visual Analytics. That's where I got the title of my talk from. And we put together a roadmap, which you could call the Roadmap 2 after the Jim Thomas and Kristen Cook book, which is a European's perspective on that, which is a little different and a little broader and a little more concrete than the American one. So with that, I have done my introduction, and I've probably spent already too much time. But now I'm getting into more concrete problems and techniques that I wanted to show you. And I selected a few of these. Actually, after my first talks with people in the morning, I thought I could have given a completely different talk, talking about some of the similarity search work that we did or the high-dimensional clustering work. So I selected some of these things, and I'm having many more slides that I can present anyway. So I'll at some point switch to topics, and you may be able to help me select the topics that you are interested in more. I'm happy to kind of tailor that. If there's any of the 4 topics that you like more details on, I may do that first and then switch to the other ones. Is there any preference for one of the 4 topics here? Because I will be going into depth with a couple of them, and the rest will be kind of flying over.
No.
High-dimensional? Okay, I see. So it's second, so that has a good chance of getting covered well enough. Is there any interest in network security? Yes. Okay, so I keep that first then I don't have to jump too much. Okay, so network security is one of the projects where we are working with in a big European project. And this is with companies like Symantec, France Telecom, and others. And what we did in the beginning was designing some visualizations. And there's not too much interesting about it. It's basically a tree map showing the IP space of the world, like the used IP addresses that we see. And like the space that you see is corresponding to the number of IP addresses that North America gets. And the special thing about the tree map is that it's a different tree map algorithms on the different levels that you have. Like on the highest level, it's on the continent level. You try to retain the geographic position, and of course, this is all automatically done, depending on the window size that you have and so on. And on the lower levels, and I'm now going to zoom in into Europe here, you still have a geographical layout, and you try to keep the layout as the relationships between the countries in place. But once you zoom in on the next level, this is the AS level, the autonomous systems level, which are basically the providers like AT&T and other companies in Germany. It's the German Telecom and like the DFN is the other big one. But you see that, and this is already showing you by color some data, and the data is university data, like we have installed a gateway on the gateway of the whole university where every package is monitored and gets reported to our server, and this is already a challenge to do that because there are many packages coming in. You have to aggregate them on the fly, and storing like a week of data is already kind of the limit that you can fit into the terabytes that we reserved for that. So this is kind of, on that side, already fun. But this is now aggregating the traffic, and you see that there is one provider in Germany having high traffic, and red is high traffic here, because all the students have their accounts there. That's very simple. This is a cheap provider in Germany, and that's why we get plenty of traffic from there. But you see that there are even smaller ones that are red, which is also a cheap provider and kind of interesting to do that. And you can, of course, zoom in further on the network level. And if you do that, and this is now real data from AT&T, and they see a lot more data than we see as a university. This is now showing a botnet spreading in China. This is the same map of China with the AS level China, and all that is red is basically infected. And now you see basically it's spreading over time. And what AT&T is using this for is basically showing AT&T is here, right? You are safe. That's basically showing their customer this map. And that's the main purpose that AT&T is using it. But you can also use it for real things. And actually the thing is much more complicated. You have connections. This is only showing you source or destination. So actually what you have is connections, and connections you can only visualize partially, because if you just show the connections, like which IP is connected to which, screen is full. You have billions of lines. No way to do that. So you need to do something like edge bundling. And what I'm going to show you now is the system that we developed for network security. And this is an example of visual analytics. Actually a very nice one. And the system looks like this. We have the gateway, the university network connected to the global internet. We have the gateway here, and we store all the NetFlow records. NetFlow is already an aggregation of the IP packets. Like a set of IP packets that are correlated are combined into a NetFlow, which is already helping you. And of course, it's anonymized, that because we could see what students are doing, right? So we're not supposed to do that, so it's anonymized. And so what the university has in place is a commercial intrusion detection system, which is generating alerts. And our system now is basically taking information from the gateway that we collect and from the intrusion detection system that the university has as a commercial system, and combining that information in order to analyze the data. And in order to make it even more effective, we added components here. We had to do some IP packet stream processing to do the aggregations fast enough, and then aggregate the net flows on the fly, because it's otherwise killing our storage. And on the other side, we added honeypots. I don't know whether you're familiar with that technology, which is basically computers that have no other purpose than attracting bad traffic. And everybody who is accessing that computer is actually a bad guy. Very, very simple. You simulate an open computer, nothing else than kind of putting it out there in an IP space that you're not using. Nobody's supposed to go there. And that is basically a network of these honeypots are set up all over the world, and we get the traffic. And it's very nice because all the bad guys are kind of getting there at some point. So this is helping us to increase the alerts here. And now what the system is doing is basically doing very simple visualizations of the net flow summaries. And this is kind of statistics over time, source IP, destination, and port level information, just giving you kind of heat map type stuff, not worth going into details. The IDS summaries, this is coming from the intrusion detection system. It's basically a sorted list of suspicious IP addresses. That's what it is. And you have certain dimensions, how much traffic, and we can just colorize that, and so nothing intelligent here either, right? Just taking the two inputs. Now what we do with both of it, this is basically the input for the administrator to go into it. And then this is actually the visual analytics system that we built around it. And of course, these techniques are part of it because you need it all integrated. And I'll explain that in a second. And then, of course, if you really investigate an issue, you have to go into the details, and then you need to drill down and go onto the like net flow record level and really get the numbers in order to decide finally. So now, what is now the core of the system? And that's now something where you basically, let me go back here, where you see, for example, here I have intrusion detection alerts. And what they currently do is basically they take the first top level and work them off, right? You have an alert, you go in and look at it, what it is. And is it really valid? Shut down a computer, is something hacked, and whatever. And what they keep doing is working off the first few because there are more coming in real time. So what we allow them now is to select more of this. You can select the whole list and then look at the traffic and combine it with the net flow summary data that we got from the gateway and see what it actually means. Which computers did they access? Is there any pattern to it? And then you get to this view, and this is now a view where analytics goes in, the intrusion detection alerts go in, the honeypot information goes in, and the net flow summaries go in. And what you see here is basically the university network as a background or any subnet of it that you're looking at. And that's a tree map as before, the IP space tree map that we saw before. And the outside are the external IP addresses that accessed our network. And they are not placed in a random order, but they are placed according to their traffic. So what you see here in this particular case, you see many of these nodes accessing these external IP addresses, accessing a few computers in here. You see that by the color edge bundling thing here. So what this is clearly, and maybe you even guessed it now, it's a distributed attack. You have many external computers just accesses with a few accesses, a few computers in the network. And this is something that happens every day. You have these scanners, and the scanners basically scan every computer in the network, and that's the picture that you saw here. This is a scanner scanning every single computer, just one package, like seeing whether there's a port open. And then the distributed attacks come in, many computers trying a few passwords or whatever to hack it. And you see that on the university network probably here as well every day. And of course, with some computers, they are successful and then their behavior changes and so on and so forth. And what is going in here is the complex combination of the intrusion detection system with the data visualization and again, a clustering algorithm depending on the traffic pattern that they have, which is allowing us to make a useful picture out of this. And this is an operational system, so you see all the rest here is all for the network specialists to quickly get the information they need to do it, to take action and find out who it is, which computer, and whatsoever. Like you see the lookups and stuff like that. And if you click on the next thing, you get the host details, the network details. You see when it happened, who did it, and so on and so forth. So this is kind of embedded into that. And just to show you a couple more pictures, we have different ways of visualizing this by little kind of icons here. You see different patterns happening. You see traffic, and this is kind of little glyphs, if you want, little clock glyphs that give you temporal information. And you see that you have quite different behavior for different computers in your network. You see here you have always the same kind of traffic all day around, while here you have very different traffic patterns, and you have high traffic in some of these computers. And we have even another way of visualizing this with a similar metaphor, but not now linearly arranged, but circularly arranged. And this actually works quite well for drilling down dynamically through the network hierarchy. Because you have a very big hierarchy in the network, you can do it on any level. And you see here, if you zoom into this one, you see that not all the computers have the same behavior. It's really different, and you see very different patterns. And this is all real data. So, and I could explain what it means. And it's fun to do that on high-resolution displays. And this is our control room setup, where we have like each of these is a 10-megapixel display, an LCD display, which is a touch table to control it. And that's fun. You have 30 megapixels controlled by a touch table, where you can do a lot of this fancy stuff quite nicely. And there are more different attacks types, like BGP attacks. I don't know whether you are familiar with BGP, Border Gateway Protocol, which is basically where companies, ASs, announce which part of the IP space they are responsible for. And this is actually something where a company like AT&T just announces, we take that part of the IP space. And anything you route through us. And you can just announce it. And it's very surprising to me that it works that well. But the bad thing is that some company can say, I'm taking this space. And they are just rerouting through their network. And they do anything to that traffic if they get it, right? And actually, Iran did it. Some countries and ASs in countries did it, just rerouting through their network by announcing it, and this is distributed in real time, and there's no control to prevent it, except the other side saying, I want it too, right? And then you have kind of these changing BGP protocols, and there are quite a number of attacks going that way, and we, together with Symatec in our project, work on it and have developed a system like this. And just to explain you a little of it, let me go in quickly here. You see here, this is again time way, and you see part of the time it went through this pass, and this is basically taking traceroute information. And part of the time it went this way. And you see the countries, and like you see it's rerouted through the US, and here a US AS kind of took part of the traffic, basically rerouted through the US instead of going directly. And of course they used it for doing spamming or kind of hacking some of this traffic. And that is no way to prevent it right now. It was very surprising to me to see. This is kind of the reality out there. It's like in the Wild West. It's basically that these providers agree that kind of it works. And there is no real control of it, and that's why Symatec is very interested in that. Okay, I could explain a lot more about this, but I want to get on. I have like a few minutes, 50 minutes left to do a little other examples. High-dimensional subspace analysis. And let me briefly go into some of the research that we did here, and now I'm getting a little more theoretical, but I keep it quite simple for those of you who may not have that much knowledge in the data mining clustering area. So let's take a data set, and of course I'm doing this all in 2 dimensions that I can visualize it, but assume the data is high-dimensional, right? I just can't plot it that nicely. And what kernel density estimation does, it takes a kernel function like a Gaussian or square wave function and puts this function around each point and then sums it up so you get a density function. And now you can define clusters in that density function. And now I'm going back to a 1-dimensional, because then I have kind of even simpler where you see the densities of the single points here, the density function up here. And you can have different definitions of clusters here. Of course, intuitively, you want the peaks of the density function to be the clusters, and you need kind of a definition for that, and you see a center-defined definition is taking basically always the clusters that come out if the density attractor, which is basically attracting to a maximum, is above a certain threshold. And you can do for a given threshold here, you see I have 2 clusters, this cluster and this cluster of my data. And if I'm having a different threshold, I may get 3 clusters. It really depends on that threshold. And you can have a different definition where you combine all the clusters that are linked by a path, which is above that level. So if I take this path, then I get, instead of 3 clusters, I get only 2. And this is basically, if you do that, giving you a certain cluster definition. Now you see a 2-dimensional example here. You see the plane of this threshold moving up, and you see the type of cluster that you get. You get arbitrary shaped clusters, which is nice. And you see basically how this develops over time. And you have another parameter, of course. The other parameter is the kernel, and the kernel is basically defined by the sigma. And you see if I'm modifying the sigma, I also get different number of clusters, right? From having many clusters in the beginning to having only a few in the end, depending on the sigma level. So this is actually the basis for the Denclu algorithm, which is quite general. If you know the clustering field, you know there are different types of clustering algorithms like density-based clustering. DB-scan is one of the famous representatives. And this kind of idea can generalize this. If you just set the sigma of the kernel function to the EPS parameter of the dbScan algorithm and the C value to the min points value, then you get the same results at dbScan. But you can also do partition-based clustering like k-means, as you all know probably, or hierarchical clustering. So this is a nice thing. And another nice property is that it's quite noise invariant. If you have random noise, of course, like uniformly distributed noise, you see that you get your peaks here. And if I add noise now, I still have the peaks, right? And you can show that given certain properties of the noise that you can still find it. So what is now the basic idea of the Denclu algorithm? And this is a very simplified version here, and of course, again, only in two-dimensional space that I show it to you, but you have to assume that it's in higher dimensional space. So the first thing is you get the minimum bounding rectangle for your data set. Then you basically partition it into a cube set. And you see that you get certain populated cubes. And now some of you say, you said high dimensional. High dimensional grid doesn't work. You can't compute a 100-dimensional grid. Clearly no. But we only determine the populated cubes. Only the cubes are stored where there's at least one data point in there. And this is at most n, of course, right? So it's limited by the number of data points. We never store or compute any of the cubes that are empty. Clearly, that wouldn't be possible. And then it's still quite a good number. And the main thing that we have to do to calculate what we need to calculate for the clusters is we need to have the density attractors, right? Going to the maximum of these clusters. So we need to start with something. And starting with every populated cube would be too big of an effort. So we start with the highly populated cube. Highly populated is whatever, like for high dimensional data, it's more than 2 points, 2 or more. It's already highly populated. The likelihood of having more than 2 points in one of these cells is very low in high dimensions. So starting with that is already quite easy. So it's not a difficulty here. And then what you have to do is now finding the neighboring ones that also have data points, the populated ones that are neighboring. And you have to do that efficiently. You don't want to do it linearly, because otherwise it's a nonlinear algorithm. And this can be done by storing all the populated cubes in an index structure, like a B tree. And then you have properties, because of the numbering scheme that you are using, to get easy access to the neighboring ones. And you have to connect them up. And then you can simply calculate the clusters. And like if you compare this, you see that you find kind of clusters compared to Birch. Birch is one of the typical clustering algorithms. You see that you find clusters, but given the percentage of noise, it's still like going down the percentage of clusters found. And the reason for that is that you may have this case, and you can easily imagine this is a perfect Gaussian distribution, but given my grid, you split the cluster. And in each of these cells, these 8 cells, you have only 1 point, at most 1 point. It's a perfect Gaussian cluster, but you wouldn't find it with our algorithm. And this is actually what happens here. The clusters are split, and you say, oh, it's unlikely. It's not that unlikely in high-dimensional space. It does happen. So what can we do here? And like I'm skipping some of the details, but we do another algorithm, the OptiGrid algorithm, which is doing a recursive partitioning based on contracting projections, determining some cutting planes through the data that are not cutting through any of the clusters. Basically, we are now not cutting regularly in a grid, but have an arbitrary grid. So you never cut through a cluster. That's the idea. And then we use a generalized grid, and the same is working as before. So what is the idea here? Contracting projections are ones that are not like of the left type and not of the right type. If you are doing the right type, it wouldn't work, and you can prove that. You have to have this property. The cutting plane is defined as all the points left or right of it, very simple. And like the partitioning function can be defined as being 1 if you're on one side and else 0 on the other side. And given that, you can now build up multidimensional grids. And you need a coding function, which is uniquely identifying every grid cell to be able to store it later in the index structure. And this is done by this coding function. And this is uniquely identifying every cell with a number. And you can have now arbitrary grids. It can be this type of a grid. It's just a projection that is going this way here, and then you partition into two halves. And you can recursively do that. Take any set of cutting planes and then do that. And you can even have arbitrarily shaped cutting planes. This is also a cutting plane. We just have no computer algorithms to do that easily. So you need some human kind of input here or some segmentation algorithms that help you to find these. And then the algorithm is quite easy. Determine a set of contracting projections, however you get them. Then determine the best cutting planes. Then if there are no good cutting planes, you are done. Otherwise, determine this multidimensional grid. Basically do the highly populated grid cells as before. And then for each of these cells, you recursively do the same algorithm. You can do it hierarchically, which is important depending on the data properties. And this really helps. You see now we are staying up there, finding all the clusters, even in higher dimensions. And you see here the percentage of noise is also not that critical. You see here it went down, and now we stay up here. And you need a visual interface, some of it determining what you need. This is just the efficiency. No, this is the effectiveness and the efficiency also. So the efficiency is really much better. You detect a lot more subclusters in your data. And this is the visual interface here. And I'm not going into the details. This is the hierarchical application of the algorithm here in 4 levels and 3 levels. And these are the different visualizations with icons and properties that support it. And just to give you a feeling, like the number of data points within the subclusters that you have in the different projections are exemplified by the color and how well it partitioned. The cluster may be well partitioned or less well partitioned. That's the sharpness of these icons. And you have that for one-dimensional. There you have a neighborhood, and here we have two-dimensional projections where we only have kind of these two properties but no geographic relationship. And of course, you can then interactively kind of partition this. And then you have these kind of arbitrarily complex grids. And like in the real data, it's even more complex. In high-dimensional data, often the interesting data is in subspaces, not even in the full space. And if you do that, you get these kind of even different subspaces. I don't know whether you're familiar with subspace clustering. This is just a simple example. Having some properties of a person, and you have the income versus travel frequency subspace, some data clustering in 3 clusters here, and you have a different subspace, like the health subspace, blood pressure versus age, where you have different clusters that kind of arbitrarily overlap with the others. And this is the truth for many of the real-world data sets that we have, and we are working with the most sophisticated subspace clustering algorithms developed by some colleagues of us, and we are trying to help them improve their algorithms by doing subspace analysis and develop a tool. This is just exemplifying, again, different subspaces of the data. And the basic idea that you see here in this subspace, and this is a visualization of a projection of that subspace. In this case, only 2 dimensions go in. But this is, again, a subspace consisting out of 3 dimensions, and this is a PCA of that one. So you get some feeling for the different selections here. And this is not interactively selected, but an algorithm determined this is a good subspace, these 2 dimensions. And now you have many of this, and this is now the system that kind of is kind of shown here. You see all the different dimensions, and this is kind of real output of the subspace clustering algorithm. And you see that you have similar shapes here. And now the system allows you to explore that space, because some of the subspaces are really redundant, even being defined in different dimensions. Some of them are complementary, are really having different information. Some of it have the same data, some have different data. So these are interesting properties, and you can explore this with different visualizations. And actually, you can color it, hierarchically cluster it, and like, I actually have no time. If you're interested, we have to go into that in more detail. Okay, I have done the 2 that I wanted. So now I can do a little more just on the superficial side and showing you a little fun stuff that we are doing in 5 minutes that I've left. Molecular biology is actually one that is fun. We are working with real biologists, wet lab people there. And something that you know certainly is that you have the gene, right? And I'm staying very simple here. And the interesting thing is about the genetic code is you can read it in different reading frames. You can start reading here, and if you start reading here, you get certain amino acids. But you can also read one bit later. I call it bit. It's not bit, of course, right? You can basically start one later, and you also get a sequence of amino acids, completely different one. It's like reading 1 bit later, or 2 bits later. And you can, in biology, you can do that. You have 3 reading frames in the positive direction, and 3 more in the backwards reading, and all of them get completely different amino acid sequences. And now this is kind of fun. Consider your computer. You read it 1 bit later. You assume, and if you try it, you will find out there's nothing useful in that bit stream. If you decode it with whatever matter, try it, you'll find out. And I did that for fun with ASCII code, nothing. Never even a single non-trivial word. In biology, the interesting thing is there is some knowledge hidden in there, and there's actually genes that live in these different directions. And this is a real example here. You have some gene here and another gene being sitting here. And they are both expressed, they both contain information, they are both useful, and in some cases necessary. And this is kind of astonishing. Biologists so far assumed until very recently this doesn't happen. So once they found this one here, they stopped looking for anything else. And now they find out, and that's part of our project, and we just submitted to Nature. I don't know what happened to the paper yet, but it's in submission because the biologists think it's a really great thing. For E. coli, one of the most studied bacteria, they found out that there's 30% additional genes hidden in the overlapping reading frames, which is mind-boggling. 30% is a lot in this organism that is well studied. And of course, the biologists have a lot of problems with that because like evolutionary, it's a difficult problem to explain it. How does it come into being? So it's like kind of, they have no theory yet. That's simply, it's a question. Like going from overlapping to non-overlapping is trivial. You have gene duplication and then knockout of one of the streams, right? No problem, you survive. But how to get it overlapped, it's like putting 2 ASCII streams or 2 programs on top of each other in a bit stream. And you know, as a computer scientist, this is an NP-hard problem for sure. Even with our coding schemes, it's impossible, I would say, at least for non-trivial ones. We don't get that. Biology is different, but the biologists also think it may be even a potential for evolution because you can fix information on top of each other and then have some completely different information that is fixed in the evolutionary process without having any meaning. And then at some point it turns out to have meaning. So it's both ways that they think, but it's very kind of interesting. And our tool is just helping them to explore this extreme stream of data. And this is now high throughput screening data, because they want to see, of course, which ones are functional, right? It's not enough to find the reading frames, but the open reading frames you can identify easily, but to really see which are used. And you have different kind of properties, different parameters here, and I don't have time to go into the details, but the idea is here that you have basically information on the different reading frames shown here, and this is the expression level, and you also see it kind of coded in these different sense and anti-sense strengths. And this is a fuller gene which is aggregating the information with coverage and overlap, and like reading density, like the parameters that they care about in the process of selecting good candidates. And like this is an example where a known gene is here, and you see that you have some, like this is reading this way, and you see that you have some sequence here that is quite likely to be an overlapping gene because it's highly expressed. It's only expressed in this frame here. So this is a good candidate to look into further with their wet lab experiments. And there are more examples like this that we found to be useful. Okay, so I don't really have time to go into this. So I probably just skip over it. There's plenty of nice research in visual analytics that you can do in exploring large data sets on the humanities and document analysis side. And you may have seen some of the pictures that you see here. Like, I'm not going to explain it all, just giving you a little feeling. This is kind of books. Each of these little blocks is a book of Jack London. And these books are here from Mark Twain. And you see they're quite different. There's something special about one of these books. And these are different features that have been proposed by linguists to distinguish authors. And as you can tell, Huckleberry Finn is quite different than all the others, given different kind of feature vectors that we explored. And how do you have to read it? This is basically one little box here is one page of the text or one 10,000 word block of the text. And you calculate some feature, like sentence length or word vectors or vocabulary richness. And this is all defined by linguists, not by us. And you can apply this to other books, like this is a Bible. And interesting, this is every verse of the Bible. Every single dot here is one verse of the Bible. So maybe if you're interested in that type of books, you can verify theories like, was it written by two authors? And this is kind of what we put it out, and some theologians are using it, so it's fun. I don't know. We have done things about sentiment analysis of document streams. We are connected to one big European organization that is collecting information about news data from all over the world in 46 languages, about 100,000 news articles per day, from about 3,000 sources in 46 languages. And we analyze that data and try to display it with different methods. Just one example here, showing you US data before the presidential election, not the last one, but the previous one. And you see different things here shown, like the color, it's in this case mapped to the different parties. And the sentiment score is mapped to the deviation from the middle line. Going down is negative, going up is positive. And if you look at that in more detail, this is just explaining it, you see negative stuff about Palin here. You see that dashed line going out to the bottom. And if you click in, you see what the problem was here. Her kind of, this was the misuse of power accusations that they had. This is something negative about Obama. The plot that they tried to assassinate him, you can easily detect in the big screen of things. And you see also the limit here. We detected this to be negative, and an assassination plot is something negative, right? But it also was positive for his campaign. So we couldn't measure what we actually wanted to measure. So there's still the semantic gap here that we are facing, and that's why visualization is really crucial here. Okay, let's skip over this. If you have sparse data in time, we have developed a different visualization. Customer feedback is usually sparse in time. And you see that visualization. I can explain it in more detail if you are interested in it. We have done work in customer review analysis, coming up with this automatically, like from Amazon reviews. And there's a lot of technology going into that. And we have worked on comparing languages for linguists. And this is going deep into linguistic knowledge about the different languages. They have a hierarchy of languages, the supposed development of languages. And we have a tool that shows different parameters that they are able to measure. It's like a 120-dimensional vector, and allowing them to explore that in the hierarchy of things. And that's kind of fun to go into that, which I don't have time now. So let's jump into the conclusions. There's lots of things that we need to do. And some of you are working on some of this. Uncertainty, complex structure, streaming. Lots of interesting new applications that are very challenging. Will keep us busy until we retire. At least for me, that will be true. That's enough work for the next 25 years. And of course, evaluation is always critical because user studies are not the only thing. This is not enough for a visual analytics system. And analyzing that is really, and evaluating this is really a challenge. So what we need is more integrated systems, not only visualizing data or the results of the data, but integrating with the analysis algorithms. And this is something that I have tried to show you in some cases how we did it. And I would like to close with a quote that is quite old, but which is motivating me in my research. All truths are easy to understand once they are discovered. The point is to discover them, and this is kind of what I try to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Some people need to leave. I know